the shooting range. In this episode, pages of history, the creation of a Japanese interceptor called the J5N Tenrai, tactics and strategy. What's the deal with flaps and what types of flaps can be found in the game? And metal beasts, a top-tier Italian MBT. Say hi to a new modern Italian MBT, the C1 Ariete, found right at the top of the Italian ground tech tree. Its main armament is a 120mm gun, which is equipped with a two-plane stabilizer and an elevated range from -10 to +20 degrees. Apart from that, there is also a Beretta machine gun coaxial with the main weapon, and another two at the top of the turret. Finally, there are smoke grenade launchers on the sides of the turret. The central glacis plate makes use of a spaced armor configuration. There are two layers of high-hardness rolled steel with 80mm of air between them. As for the lower glacis plate, here you get 50mm of RHA. The sides are protected by a 10mm thick steel plate complemented by 20mm thick screens on the inside and shaped charge threat protections on the outside. The front of the turret is a 5-layer combination of high-hardness rolled armor, air, composite armor with NERA elements, and rolled homogeneous armor. In the gun mantlet we see two 20mm plates of rolled steel, again, with some air between them, followed by another 90mm layer of armor. The sides of the turret are also protected by a spaced armor configuration with 20mm and 40mm plates of steel divided by 140mm of air. Man, it's like half of its armor just flies in the air above the tank, doesn't it? The engine and the transmission in the back of the tank are separated from the crew by an 8mm thick screen. The first stage ammo stowage lies in the hull right under the turret, with the rest of the rounds located in the frontal part of the vehicle. And in the middle of all this, 4 crew members run the show from their conventionally placed seats. Now let's talk about its ammo. Right from the get-go, you can get DM33 APFSDS that can pierce 478mm of steel at 100 meters. That means that the C1 Ariete is capable of eliminating other MBTs from the front, and is effective at middle and long-range encounters immediately after you've purchased the tank. Then there is the Heat FS piercing 650mm of armor at any distance. Though, don't forget that at BRs this high, a lot of your enemies will have good protection against this type of ammunition. Because of that, the AP round will often prove to be more effective, even though it seems less impressive on a datasheet. But the best round to shoot with this weapon is the CL3145 APFSDS. Here are just facts. It can penetrate more than 600mm of armor from a kilometer away. It's the most powerful subcaliber round in the whole game right now, and it can sometimes punch through even the turrets of top enemy MBTs. You've got a reload rate of 6 seconds, which allows for some nice and effective shooting, especially if you take into account that you have a two-plane stabilizer and great elevation angles. Furthermore, the tank is quite fast. Its max speed is 65 kph, with around 45 kph of guaranteed off-road performance and 30 kph while going in reverse. As for disadvantages, the C1 Ariete has 2 of them, the armor and the size. Even the front of the turret can't always survive an APFSDS hit from another Tier 7 MBT, and the sides will crumble even under autocannon fire. Plus, this tank isn't that easy to hide, and it looks deliciously vulnerable out in the open. So, how do you play on the C1 Ariete? This tank performs pretty well both on offense and defense. Even in CQC, thanks to its fast turret traverse, good maneuverability, and a great weapon. When engaging in long-range combat, The stabilized gun and rounds with record-breaking piercing rates will turn the whole battlefield into your, shooting range. This Italian is fast enough to be the first to arrive at a capture point, but it's imperative that you have some backup before actually going in. You can't hide behind the nearest bush, and any shot in your direction might be fatal. So take a heavily armored friend with you. He'll tank enemy shots, and you'll unleash your amazing firepower on those who dare to defy your team. The development of this two-engine shore-based interceptor began in the spring of 1943. But if we begin our story there, we simply won't understand a thing. The only way to get to the bottom of this is to start from the creation of its predecessor, the J5N Gecko, an aircraft that went into service right before the beginning of the Pacific War. At the time, the Navy was all about ship-based aircraft. They mostly left the interception of the enemy long-range recon aircraft and bombers in the hands of the pilots of the Imperial Army and their trusty Ki-45. The Naval Command was, in fact, quite reluctant to introduce the Gecko into service. To tell you the truth, they didn't even know what kind of aircraft it was supposed to be. First, they wanted it to have contra-rotating propellers. Then they disposed of two remote turrets because, well, they didn't work properly anyway. All these changes didn't make the plane better, so it was repurposed to a reconnaissance aircraft. Then, after all that fuss, they completely ignored the unspoken rule that you should start working on a successor model right after your new plane is introduced into service. By 1943, the Allies started getting the upper hand in the Pacific, and Army interceptors weren't that much help. Enter Major Yasunako Zono, who was the biggest fan of the idea of using nighttime interceptors in the whole of the Imperial fleet, and the best expert in this field as well. He took the nearly forgotten two-engine aircraft, outfitted it with guns, installed at an angle, and later with an airborne radar. The Gecko was reborn as the first Japanese night fighter. The problem was, by that time, it was grossly outdated and simply outclassed by the aircraft it was supposed to intercept, like the newest B-24s. So the command contacted the Nakajima Corporation and ordered it to create a new two-engine interceptor ASAP, or even faster if possible. The corporation's leadership, in their turn, contacted Nakamura Katsuji, the aircraft designer who had created the Gecko in the first place. They ordered him to take this aircraft, that was, keep in mind, very problematic, and to modify it to fit the new standards. Also ASAP, of course, so that it could go 660 kph at 8,000 meters and also get to that altitude in less than 10 minutes. How? Well, who's the aircraft designer in the room? Just to do it, and do it fast. Well, Nakamura did everything he could. The Gecko received a new laminar wing, with a smaller wingspan and a new 18-cylinder Nakajima Homare radial engines instead of the 14-cylinder Nakajima Sakaya one. The aircraft was turned into a one-seater and got an impressive set of weapons. 4 cannons, including 2 30mm Type 5s. By the way, it was the first time ever when the Imperial Army shared a weapon with the Japanese Navy, and so the Gecko became the J5N Tenrai. Sadly, very soon it became apparent that it wasn't made for engines this big and heavy. In fact, they were so heavy that the aircraft could nose over while just standing on the ground. And that wasn't even the main problem. The Gecko was hard enough to control, given the fact that it had been designed with contra-rotating propellers in mind. And, let us remind you, it didn't get those in the end. It didn't have the right twist of a wing in the first place. And now, the Tenrai had a laminar wing, which resulted in a further loss of its directional stability. To solve this problem, you'd have to, at the very least, completely redesign the aircraft's whole tail section, which received no changes compared to the Gecko whatsoever. The very first test flights clearly demonstrated that numerous half measures were the worst way to go. It was obvious that the new engines and the new laminar wing could only work on a completely new aircraft, made from scratch, and that it would take several years, not months, to build one. But it was the year 1944 already. The newest B-29s had to be stopped, not anywhere above New Guinea or the Philippines, but in the sky above Japan itself. The team built a few prototypes, but the J5N never went into full production. This aircraft had an amazing rate of climb, but the desired level of control was never reached. There is some speculation, though, that Tenrai prototypes were actually used to defend Japan from a couple of American attacks. There isn't much proof, but if true, some B-29s got quite a beating. The guns were surely not the problem of this aircraft. Have you ever been in a dogfight in our game? Probably yes, and most likely wound up in a losing position at least a couple of times. How did it happen? An aircraft that is objectively less agile suddenly turned on the spot, or an enemy managed to pull off a somewhat longer vertical maneuver even though your starting speed appeared to be the same. That probably happened because your adversary did a better job at handling their high-lift devices, or simply flaps, the auxiliary control surfaces on the trailing edge of a wing. Today, we'll talk about all the different types of flaps found in War Thunder and discuss the pros and cons of using each one of them. We'll start with the simplest of them all, a plain flap. When extended, it increases the curvature or camber of the wing, allowing it to generate more lift at lower speeds. On the other hand, it also increases the wing drag, which results in the loss of speed and increases the vortex drag, lowering the values of the critical angle of attack. You won't find any flaps of this type in the game. Aircraft designers pretty much stopped using them long before World War II, but they were a very important stepping stone. An important upgrade came in the form of the slotted flap. Its distinctive feature is the gap between the flap and the wing. It forces high-pressure air from below the wing over the flap, encouraging the airflow to stay attached to the flap and thus increasing lift. This type of a high-lift device can be found on many in-game aircraft. For instance, on the German Bf-109, the legendary American Mustang, and also all World War II-era single-engine ship-based aircraft of the US. The Junkers design is a variant of a slotted flap, where the flap is fixed below the trailing edge of the wing. This design allows airflow to pass between the wing and the flap, even when the flap is retracted. The outer part of this flap design basically serves as ailerons, while the flapping side of the business is taken care of by its two inner sections. This type of flap is, for instance, used on the German U-87 dive bomber. Be careful, this bulky aircraft might prove to be a very dangerous opponent in a dogfight. Then you get the split flap, also sometimes called the Schwenk-type flap. It deflects from the lower surface of the wing, leaving the upper surface immobile, and produces more lift than a plain flap, but still causes a lot of drag. Nevertheless, this type of high-lift device was very popular with Soviet engineers. You can find split flaps on Soviet Yaks, LAGGs, and even MiGs. Also, the most popular flap design on the list is the Fowler flap. It doesn't just increase camber, it also increases chord. It's basically a split flap that slides backwards before hinging downwards, thereby increasing first chord, then, ever so slightly, camber. These flaps are used on many Japanese aircraft and the P-38 Lightning and the B-29. By the way, what if we also make it in a way so that it has a slot, or a series of slots? Well, this way, we make one of the best flap designs in the game, utilized on the Japanese B-7A2 Ryusei, or the American Destroyer. Another type of the flap can be found on Sunderlands and Stirlings. That's the gouge flap. It operates more or less similarly to the Fowler flap, but the flap extends into the wing and was used mostly to improve landing performance. The British Firefly comes with a very unusual kind of a flap, the so-called Fairy Youngman flaps. Thanks to their peculiar design, when fully extended, they serve almost like an additional wing, giving the aircraft a wide speed range for evasive turning in combat. What's great is that this configuration could be used on even the highest of speeds. The takeoff and landing settings operate pretty much like with the Fowler flaps, and to great effect. That's it for all flaps that are used in the game. Did any of those help you to pull off a win in a tough flight? Or maybe you suffered an unexpected defeat due to some clever flap trickery on your opponent's part. Share your stories in the comments below. The first question comes from the Dark Frostmare. Will there be a vid comparing all the supersonic jets with each other so we can see whichever is best? Aye, thanks for the idea. That might be an interesting one to make. We'll try to make it soon. Jonathan Carranza asks, how do you know the names of most people in pages of history? Hi, Jonathan. The text for these segments are created with the help of several history buffs that have been researching all things World War II most of their lives. There are the kind of people that are ready to spend years to research a specific battle or a vehicle by burying themselves in piles of documents, reading all sorts of witnesses' accounts, and paying attention to minutiae. Say hi to them. Then there is a suggestion sent by Dylan van Aswegen. Please make a video on shell mechanics for ships, please. A mind reader among us. Actually, we're making this video right now. If everything goes according to plan, you'll see it this very week. Don't forget to subscribe and to click on the bell to get a notification when the time comes. Tiger2V writes, Hey Gaijin, would love if you would do bomber triathlon. That would make my day. When it comes to using bombers, it mostly boils down to the skill of the pilot, and predictably or unpredictably, of the target's movement. We're not really sure how to make a triathlon of this type, so that it would be both fun to watch and fair to our contenders. We'll think about it though. The last message comes from a player called Sherbanator76mm. I actually love this game. Played it for 5 years. Happy to see it still has a great fanbase willing to support and fund its next updates. Thanks, mate. We really appreciate all our veterans. You're amazing. Your support is what keeps us going, basically. At the same time, thanks to all of you that joined in on the fun later. You often look at War Thunder or appreciate the game in a completely different way than we or veteran players do. That allows us to see the game in the new light as well as take it to new heights. Well, that's it for today. You have been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment. Now's the time to subscribe to the channel, so click on that lovely subscribe button. Second, click on the bell button. And then, because you really do like it, leave a like and tell us what you think in the comments below. See you in a week, folks.